Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome in to a very special edition of Showdown Style Established the Show. That is the Cody Main birthday edition of the program. We are here for a really fun one for your birthday, Cody, in Chargers Cowboys. Definitely a better one than I feel like we've done in a while. 51 point over under, 1.5 point spread, I think. Happy birthday to you? Question mark. You excited for this one?
We'll see maybe an hour into the game if I'm posting our expectations were low picture or not. I feel like I should probably lower my expectations on my birthday as to not be disappointed by 8:15 Central Time tonight. But I'm sure I still will be disappointed. But you're right. As far as on paper matchups go, this is probably the best showdown, maybe save for Lions Chiefs in Week 1, the opener. This is probably the best showdown slate I think we've had from a pricing perspective. Certainly, I thought DraftKings did a good job there. From an actual on-field game perspective, I think this one's pretty fun. 51 point total, 1.5 point spread. Austin Eckler's back. Keenan Allen's healthy. We can finally maybe see this Cowboys offense in a neutral game script for once. And if that's the case, man, I think we could see some offensive fireworks.
Yeah, and the birthday messages, just pile it in for our guy Cody here. I think this is a good birthday present. I think we made the right call for your birthday last night to not make a show for last night's showdown. Was the right call for sure. And we're not going to look back at all in the showdown show. We're only going to look forward. All I will say is I did not flag plant Russell Wilson. If you thought I did that, that's just a fragment of your imagination. And if I did do that, let's just consider that one of the worst things I've ever done in my entire life. Not just in DFS and in the industry, just one of the worst things I've ever done in my entire life.
You somehow took my Jerry Jeudy flag plant and made it look even better by flag planting Russell Wilson yourself.
Yeah. So just absolutely nowhere to go but up, quite literally.
That's right.
But yeah, everyone, wish your boy Cody happy birthday, and all he wants for his birthday is a thumbs up on this video. That's what he told me.
That's right.
So anyway, let's dive in here, Cody. So yeah, I think a fun one tonight. Obviously, I'll be rooting for the Chargers as a Giants fan. Not that it matters anymore, but I still just actively root against these other NFC East teams. But from a fantasy perspective, I'm looking forward to this one. Interesting ways to attack it, I think. Both these offenses have enough firepower that you can really see it going one way or the other potentially. So if you want to get different, I think going some sort of onslaught or even 2-4, 4-2, you get a little bit of a discount at what seems to be the field's going to be going mostly either 4-2 Dallas or 3-3 here.
Yeah, look, and when I pulled this game up initially, I figured that I know it's not a huge home field advantage for LA. I know Dallas is a good team despite what they showed against the 49ers. So it's a really good offensive line, really good defense, of course. But I was kind of surprised to see Dallas was 1.5 point favorites. And then you start to look through the pricing angle of this slate, and you can start to see why so much of the field is getting pushed towards 4-2 Dallas heavy stuff. And I think it'll still come in quite a bit of 3-3s. Both of these offenses are relatively balanced. You kind of want to fit in as many of the studs on each side as you possibly can. But that's what we'll get to when we get to these Dallas pass catchers. A couple of them are really, really, really cheap. And that's going to funnel a lot of your builds to grabbing two of the studs from each side. And then you're going to get into some of these cheap Dallas options at the skill position, at the wide receiver and tight end positions. And I think as a result, I know I was already talking with a couple of people in the ETR Discord that they're getting a lot more Dallas heavy stuff than the 28.9% that we're already projecting. And I think part of it is just kind of the pricing dynamic of this slate. So if you're using our projections, or even if you're using industry-wide projections, I think the way that the salaries are structured here for Monday night is going to funnel you in that direction. And I do think as a result, especially in kind of the smaller field contests where the lineups are a little bit sharper, the lineups tend to be a little bit more focused around projections than kind of the hand-built stuff, you're going to see really low ownership on the 2 Cowboys, 4 Chargers stuff, and certainly low ownership on the 1 Cowboys, 5 Chargers stuff. That's one thing I'm keeping in the back of my mind for this slate. I don't know if I'm going to be able to get there from just a pricing angle, but I do think it's something that's going to end up coming in lower owned.
Yeah. And, I have not messed around with construction here yet, so I don't know how difficult it is to get the 2-4 or, 4 Chargers, if you will. But that seems like a great way to get different on the slate, right? You mentioned Chargers are home dogs here, plenty of firepower on that side as well. And then, of course, you'll get immediate leverage if you want to play into the full-on onslaught on either side here. So a lot to talk through. Let's dive right in. And start at the quarterback position. And I think the conversation should start with Justin Herbert here, who at this point in his career, I think has a significantly higher ceiling than Dak Prescott. We've seen it a little bit more this year under Kellen Moore, for sure. Hit 30 points in a DraftKings game a couple years ago. First time he did that in like almost 2 years. So, happy to see that. He gets Austin Eckler back tonight, perhaps, elevating the offense as a whole. To me, seems like a cash game lock and somebody that I'd be very interested in, no matter how I kind of build the lineup here tonight.
Yeah, I agree. I think both of these quarterbacks are cash game. I'll save that for Dak. We'll save that for Dak in a second. I think Herbert is a cash game lock. The pricing stuff on the Dallas side might make Dak a little bit less of a cash game lock consideration. I think he's a want play, but maybe that 10K price tag will just be a little bit tough to fit. I do agree with you on Herbert's ceiling. His box score results, I mean, just straight up box score watching looks phenomenal this season. 20.9, 25.2, 32.3, and 28.4, 24.4, excuse me. Just a really nice floor ceiling combo. Someone that you expect to get you around that 20-point mark consistently. And in a game that's got a 51-point total, in a game that could profile as a little bit more of a shootout than we've seen Chargers games this season. And now he's got Eckler back, still has Keenan Allen, Quentin Johnston, potentially a post-bye week rookie breakout candidate. Joshua Palmer seems like it's all systems go, even after popping up in the injury report. So, aside from not having Mike Williams in the lineup, this is about as healthy as this wide receiver core and skill position core as a whole is going to be on the season. And I think it's a great spot. I know it's a really good Dallas defense, but the Chargers do have an awesome offensive line. I think if there's any offensive line in the league that can try and contend with the Cowboys pass rush, it would be this Chargers offensive line. And I expect Justin Herbert to kind of give us that cash game type floor that we're really looking for without having to guess which skill position player is going to get there from the Chargers side. Now, with that said, as we'll get to, there's a lot of fun skill position players on this slate. And when I'm looking at tournament, how I'm playing this game out in tournaments, that 12.2% captain ownership seems a little bit rich to me, where he's, one of the highest price players on the entire slate. And you don't necessarily get that mega massive ceiling from Justin Herbert. Like if he's getting there, it probably means somebody like Keenan or Austin Eckler or Joshua Palmer's also getting there in the box scores. And I would just take that little bit of a discount that you can get on those guys, play them in the captain, and just reserve my tournament exposure to Herbert, mostly in the flex. So yes, to back up your point, Justin Herbert, for me, pretty close to a cash game lock. And then for kind of my tournament exposure on the Chargers quarterback, I'm looking mostly as a flex option.
Okay, yeah, I think I'm a little bit more bullish in captain than you are. And the way you just described Herbert, and we talk about Dak in a second, is definitely how I feel about Dak. I think I'm not interested in a Dak captain spot because I really feel like on that side, if he's getting there, especially with how traditional of a pocket passer he is, and obviously he can rush one in on the goal line, but I think there's a little bit more of upside of Herbert doing that. And I just think, there's a better chance, I think, of Herbert getting 303 spread around and he's still the guy you want. But I agree, 12% is a little bit rich, so I'd probably come in slightly under while still wanting to kind of have my bases covered there. As far as the matchup's concerned, yeah, I mean, it's a tough spot. The offensive line's good. I kind of look back to that week 2 matchup with Tennessee. Now that was in Tennessee, ended up being a 24-27 loss, I believe, but he threw the ball 40 times. Tennessee's got a good front seven also, not to the level of Dallas, but still had his 302, right? Like, I think that's kind of still within your range in a 50-point total, as, very well within your range of outcomes, even in a tough matchup. So, and, you'd want that in cash for sure. 300 yards, get the bonus, 2 touchdowns, you feeling good. So yeah, I feel like that's certainly in the range. Let's go over to Dak here. It's a tough one with Dak because, yeah, I'll just throw it to you. I mean, I know you wrote about it in your column. Why don't you expand upon kind of how your thoughts here on Dak tonight?
There's a couple things with this Cowboys offense, and this is going to be the theme of really the entire slate and of this show. And it's like, how do you really judge the Cowboys offense through 5 weeks of the season? Because they've either been an like very, very positive blowout game script where they're blowing out the Giants or blowing out the Jets, or they've been in this crazy negative game script where they're getting their doors blown off by the 49ers. So it's really tough to know what the Dallas offense is going to do when they're playing in a true neutral situation. And it's kind of a back and forth game environment. They're not either A, blowing somebody out, or B, getting blown out themselves. We can try and glean information from what we've seen, but it's just a really small sample, even through 5 weeks. They do rank second in situation neutral pass rate through week 5, but they are 22nd in pass rate over expectation at -3%. So I think that they're probably going to lean a little bit more pass heavy than we've seen just based off of PROE in a game where we expect it to be a little bit more back and forth. but it's tough to say that definitively. And you don't really know if you're going to get that type of drop back nature from Dak like we get from Justin Herbert. So I think at 10K, Dak is right there in consideration with the two top Cowboys skill position players that we'll talk about in a second here. I just don't know if he's an absolute necessity. And I feel the same way. You kind of talked me into to Herbert captain a little bit more than I was initially considering, but I feel the same way about Dak as you kind of alluded to. If I'm going Dak in tournaments, it's going to be at the flex. Probably not going to captain Dak tonight. And it's going to be in lineups where I've got one of his pass catchers a captain, whether that's Lamb or Cooks. We'll get to those guys in a second here. But my tournament interest in Dak is almost 100% reserved to having him in the flex.
Yeah, the bull case here is obviously the Dolphins' offense is his own thing, but week 1, Tua 460 yards and 3 touchdowns. Week 3, Kirk Cousins maybe a more apt comparison here, 367 yards and 3 touchdowns against this defense. For whatever reason, man, the Chargers defense just can't seem to get it together year in and year out here, despite the high-end personnel. I think, as you mentioned, this game script for Dallas has been one way or the other. If this game goes back and forth, I think you want Dak in most lineups. I just think the question is, are we getting the 460 and 3? Is that within the range? Or are we looking more something like 280 and 3? But CeeDee Lamb had 150 yards and 2 of those touchdowns, and we'll get there when we talk about CeeDee. But it's a tougher sell for me at Dak and captain. But I think the ceiling case is certainly there in this matchup for sure.
There are two kind of competing narratives, not even really narratives, just how the opposing defenses have played this season as well. The Chargers are facing the league's 7th highest situation neutral pass rate at 62%. And on the other side, the Cowboys are facing the league's highest situation neutral rush rate at 51%. So if you're thinking about what would teams be incentivized to do, certainly the Cowboys would be incentivized just based off of, what you alluded to with the Dolphins and the Vikings, but also just based off of how the Chargers have faced opposing offenses. The Cowboys would theoretically be incentivized to pass a little bit more here than maybe we would expect. And on the opposite side, maybe the Chargers are a little bit more incentivized to try and run against this fierce Dallas pass rush as teams have tried to do through the first couple of games of the year.
Yeah, and it's worth noting the other 2 games of the season for Dallas were against Aiden O'Connell and Ryan Tannehill, not necessarily the best quarterbacks in the world. And even in those games, both those guys get over 240 yards passing about, and both those guys ran in for a touchdown. So there's a floor here for quarterbacks in this matchup. So I think there's really a floor for Dak. Right? Question is how high the ceiling is. All right, let's talk running backs. Let's start on the Chargers side because welcome back Austin Eckler. Austin Eckler, who is our most expensive player on the slate. Have you heard anything, Cody, on any limitations for Eckler? Obviously, they're coming off a bye. I think he should be a full go. And how are you feeling about him with that big tag? 52% total ownership and similar captain ownership to Herbert.
Yeah, coming off of a full week of practice, was practicing in full to close the week. He's not on the injury report coming out of the bye. I kind of think it's all systems go for Austin Eckler. And we kind of saw a similar situation. Like when you have this ineffective running back take over the lead role for a couple of weeks, and then the RB1 comes back, the coaching staff almost just wants to get that inefficient running back out of the script and give it back to their RB1. So I think Joshua Kelly's going to remain involved between the tackles, certainly. But I think when it gets to when it gets time to put the chips on the table, they're going to go to Austin Eckler in high value situations, and certainly out of the passing game for sure, which is really where we want Austin Eckler. But I think in week 1, I think that's kind of a baseline for what we should expect his usage to be. Not only the rest of the season, but tonight. He led the backfield in rushing share with a 47% clip, ran around on 57% of dropbacks, had a 16% target share, and was in there for a majority of long down and distance plus 2-minute situations. I think that should be kind of our floor expectation for Austin Eckler. And this is really a good matchup. I mean, it's a good matchup from a rushing perspective. I see folks noting in chat that Dallas has a plus matchup in terms of run blocking. I think it's a plus matchup for LA in terms of what they can do on the ground against Dallas as well. And then also you have the situation where, like I said, we really want Austin Eckler as a pass catcher out of the backfield. And the Cowboys, because of that pass rush, they're yielding a huge amount of targets to opposing running backs. They're actually 4th in the league in target share to enemy running backs at 21.0%. I think this is a really good spot for Austin Eckler to kind of get going and be one of the focal points of this offense. The thing is, you mentioned the bloated 11.2K price tag. That's tough to fit on this slate where you have Keenan Allen, who's cheaper. You have CeeDee Lamb, who's cheaper. Tony Pollard is cheaper. And I'm thinking I use this phrase a lot. I'm cautiously optimistic that that ownership will come down in small field tournaments, especially because I think it's a little bit easier to build with those 9 and 10K guys than it is to get all the way up to 11-2 with Eckler. I think if there was a guy to squeeze of these quote unquote studs, I think Eckler would be the guy to come in low. And that's something that I have interest in if I get the sense that that's going to be right.
Yeah, I mean, the one game Eckler played this year was 20 total touches, I think over 155 all-purpose yards and a touchdown. And we saw what he did there in the second half of last season. I mean, the guy was getting seemingly a running touch, at least a rushing touchdown, and a receiving touchdown like every week for a couple of weeks there. The ceiling is really unmatched. And, I have a hard time feeling like it's a bad play if you want to squeeze him in. Like, it's hard to poke holes in the Austin Eckler case here tonight, assuming we're getting a full Austin Eckler workload. For the guys behind him, I mean, it was Josh Kelly that had that lead role in his absence. Much to the chagrin of our FFPC main event teams, he really did nothing with that, with those opportunities. Yeah. And now he's bloated up to 6'4". I have a hard time clicking on him here tonight, personally.
Yeah, I think this is even a tough spot for like a so bad that it's good, because at 6'4", what if he gets some of the opportunities, 40% of the rush share between the 20s, even if he falls into the end zone, like I just don't know if Joshua Kelly's going to do enough to pay off that 6.4K price tag, and it really doesn't fit the salary structure of this slate. You're sacrificing quite a bit to get to him. I know it's really low projected ownership at 8.2%, but I think that's probably still a smidge too high.
Yeah, I would agree. And I mean, I think even Isaiah Spiller, who has a slight projection on there for like a carry, I don't think that's right. No need to go there. All right. I think both Tony Pollard and CeeDee Lamb, we'll talk about both these guys, are in big bounce back spots tonight. I think one of them, if not both of them, is getting there here, Cody. I like Pollard maybe a little bit more. I think they really want to get him going, but I like both these guys. Only 9.6. You get a big discount on Eckler, and really, if you think about roll, I know they've been using Rico Dowdle a little bit more in recent weeks. If you think about roll, it's similar to Austin Eckler's, which is kind of, game script has been impacting the ceiling of all these guys. But I have no issues whatsoever in, similar to Austin Eckler, like hard time poking holes in Tony Pollard, despite the fact that we haven't necessarily seen it in the box score the past few weeks.
Yeah, man, it's been tough for Tony Pollard. And I think like a lot of these Dallas guys, I know a lot of people are having troubles struggling trying to find one, let alone multiple Dallas Cowboys offensive players that you can feel good about. A lot of that's just because of game script. And I know 5 games isn't a small sample, but they've been on both ends of the spectrum where their defense has been so damn good that they've blown out some teams. And then, you know what? They laid an egg against the 49ers last week, and that kind of stuff happens in the NFL. So you kind of just have to throw a lot of that out the window and look at some of the underlying metrics to see, maybe what can become of somebody like Tony Pollard's role if they're in neutral game script for a full 4 quarters. And man, Tony Pollard, the underlying usage is absolutely phenomenal for him. He's got a 29% targets per route run rate. He's playing on 82% of short down and distance, 55% of long down and distance, 93% of 2-minute snaps. Like you said, this is just like just like Austin Eckler, a true 3 down plus goal line role for him when the games are close. Because he's only $600 more expensive than Lamb, and I think that the touches are just a little bit more secure for him, I prefer him in cash game contests, but you're going to have a tough time talking me out of either one of those guys, Lamb or Pollard, for tournament consideration at both flex and captain. I think they're 2 of the best on the entire slate, and they're priced down a little bit because the production has been so bad. Right. But I'm kind of willing to ignore the first 5 games, ignore all the blowouts, and kind of hope that this game plays as Vegas is expecting it to play, to a 1.5 point spread where we're going back and forth for the entirety of the game.
I mean, even Pollard, though, like I know Levitan's been on this too. Like the first 3 weeks of the season, he was fine. Right? 22 points in week 1, 19, almost 20 DraftKings points in week 2, 18 in week 3. Not necessarily, early second round pick production, but not far off. It's just that the last 2 weeks have been single digit points. And like Levitan's been on the buy low train here. I still think he's going to finish as a top 6-7 RB in fantasy. I really have little doubt about that. So I could easily see it starting tonight. I like Pollard a lot. Dowdle, I definitely like more than the RB2s on the Charger side. It's priced more appropriately. Does seem to have that true, change of pace back roll or breather back roll to himself there at 2,000. So I think if you're looking for salary saving and you're trying to jam as many studs in, I think he's right in the mix.
Yeah, I do agree. You're looking at probably 15 to 20% of the team's rushing attempts, depending on how the game script goes. You're looking at him being out there for about the same amount of pass game opportunities, probably 15 to 20% of the routes. But like like Pollard, his targets per route run rate has been really strong through the first 5 games of the season. 20%, 43%, 33%, and 20% targets per route run rate. I think it's just kind of an indication that Dallas is a little bit more willing to target their running backs out of the backfield. I wouldn't expect a ton of production from him, but he's only 2K, and I think the 5.0 DraftKings base projection is pretty fair there. So I don't mind Dowdle at all.
Yeah, agreed. Okay, let's go over to pass catchers. I'm going to do wide receiver and tight end combined here to move it along on both sides. Let's go to the Chargers side because we have 2 questionable tags here that are worth talking about, and that is Josh Palmer and Donald Parham Jr. I think they're both going to play, although the Chargers called up Keelan Doss off the practice squad, so I guess that's worth noting here. Any thoughts on the questionable stuff before we kind of dive in here?
Yeah, it's tough. You can find positive and negative signals on Joshua Palmer, however you kind of want to slice it up. There's a negative that, hey, he was free of injury for the entire week and then pops up on the injury report after Saturday's practice, I believe it was. And that's never a good sign. It's a groin, which is also not a good sign. I don't like those lower body type injuries where, they could be re-aggravated in game or could kind of be a nagging type thing. But with how quickly he was ruled in, that came pretty early today. We didn't have to wait for any sort of game time decision or anything like that. Any sort of warm up activity. They must feel pretty good about him playing. So I think Joshua Palmer is going to go. We're expecting basically a normal role, and that's a pretty good role when Mike Williams has not been in the lineup. So I have interest in Joshua Palmer. He is unfortunately one of the wide receivers on this slate, and there's a few that feel underpriced. He's one of the ones that I think feels appropriately priced. In week 3, he ran around on 74% of dropbacks, had a 22% targets per route run rate. He is going to be the guy that's targeted more downfield, so he can give you those kind of big play, big explosive plays, 13.75 yard ADOT in week 3. I have interest. I think he could be a guy that also gets squeezed. This mid 7K price tag just doesn't really fit into the way roster construction is going to work out, where I think it's going to be really stars and scrubs heavy. So I think Palmer could certainly get squeezed as well. I think Parham's going to go too. And I think at 2,200, we'll talk about one of the Cowboys wide receivers on the other side. I think he acts as kind of a natural price point pivot to Michael Gallup on the Dallas side. More on him in a moment here. But yeah, this is an interesting room to break down, because I think what the field might be a little bit more gravitated towards than we're projecting right now is that post bye week rookie breakout from Quentin Johnston, especially with Palmer popping up in the injury report. And I'm kind of inclined to agree with what I think most people are going to do. It's just a tough pill to try and swallow if he's going to come with a lot of ownership. And I think at 4,200, he does kind of fit the roster construction that I think a lot of people are after, and he fits the narratives that people are wanting to paint around him. I think Quentin Johnston might end up being the guy that gets steamed up in both small and large field tournaments, and that makes me a little bit nervous.
Yeah, I think that was a really good breakdown. I have interest in Johnston because, I think what route participation was up over 67% in his last game. The salary is going to be needed here to squeeze in scrubs, even at 40, to squeeze in studs, even at 4,200. I think that's a nice discount. And I think we have to be cautious with Palmer. Like I'm interested in him. Everything about him interested in 7K, 27% total ownership, being the true wide receiver 2 there. I think he's a pretty good player. I like the profile in Palmer. I also like him because I know Jason, I think, mentioned it in chat before. I'm worried about Keenan, only a little bit. Like I think Keenan's a great player, always gonna be a PPR machine. But Keenan Allen's upside to me is very different in games Austin Eckler's available. Right, you see all these, like the 200-yard game he had. If you go back and look historically, I think it's some of the Keenan Allen stuff, right? Like some of those huge breakout games. So you have the 20 for 215 this year without Austin Eckler. You had a 16 for 145. In 2020 without Austin Eckler. He had like a 10 for 125 without Austin Eckler. And his targets in general are like double digits, like 70% of the time without Austin Eckler. With him, obviously he has those in, but he's got big, huge target games. But those huge, monstrous games, you don't see them. So with Austin Eckler, he's been like 100, 115 yards capped. You're not getting those monster games out of Keenan Allen. So if you're going to spend that kind of ownership, spend that kind of salary with ownership, a little bit less captain ownership, a little bit more captain ownership than Eckler. I prefer Eckler 1v1, which then also is another reason that I kind of go right back over to these other Chargers receivers. So I like all these guys in,
Yep.
in theory.
Yep.
If I'm just kind of picking nits, I like Keenan fourth out of Eckler, Pollard, Lamb, and Keenan personally tonight. That's kind of where I'm sitting. And then, Palmer, I'm a little bit scared of, but I like him just based off, the ownership and kind of where the field's at.
Yeah, I think one exercise on this slate in particular that you're going to have to go through is trying to do kind of process of elimination and feel good about guys. There's going to be a ton of guys that you feel good about playing, right? You can make a bull case for Keenan. You can make a bull case for Palmer, Quentin John. I mean, all these guys look good on paper because they're in awesome offenses. They're in an awesome offensive environment. I think if you start crossing out players that you feel less good about, you can start to whittle down a player pool, and then you can start to build a lineup from that. I think if there was one player I would be willing to take out of this group of Chargers wide receivers / tight ends, for me, it would be Gerald Everett. He's kind of been catch and fall down-ish type tight end, and certainly he could find the end zone. Certainly he's an awesome player. But at 4,600, given his base projection, given the guys that are priced A, right below him, and B, right above him, on both sides of the ball, to me, not a great target share, going to be like sub 10% likely with Austin Eckler back, has a really low ADOT. This is absolutely a guy that needs to fall in the end zone in order to pay off his tag. And if I have to make a bet, I'll just bet on him not falling into the end zone. I think he probably scores okay on DraftKings tonight, but not enough to force his way into winning lineups. So it's one way you can start to try and make those decisions, is just not guys you feel good about, but guys you feel okay crossing out. And for me, that would be Gerald Everett.
Yes. And I think that's all dependent on assuming Palmer and Parham are playing. If either of those guys are out, I think you have to keep Everett, firmly in the mix there. Both just be another big body if Palmer's out. And obviously if Parham's out, he'll be getting all those tight end snaps. I have no problem. Only, I know we like to keep our rules rather limited for Showdown, but I would be no problem with max one of Parham, Everett here, personally, with all the weapons that are available in this game. Hard time seeing both those guys get there together. I know a lot of love for Quentin Johnson in the chat, and I think I like him too at his ownership and stuff, everything right now. 4,200, things trending in the right direction. No issues there whatsoever. I like these. I like Parham too, just because we've seen it now this year finally. I like Palmer. Yeah, Pete asked you if I'm suggesting negatively correlating Allen and Eckler. So I would be comfortable doing that, but I'm also kind of more aggressive with these types of rules. Obviously, I don't know if you could do something like this in the solver, Cody. Like if a 5-1, don't do that negative correlation. Like that's the kind of thing I would want if that exists. But
it's tough to get that specific with it. I will say, just from looking at kind of the early sim analysis, and of course this is a final. We'll get final stuff updated in the ETR subscriber Discord when we've got all the injury information known. But if you have Austin Eckler at captain, for example, Keenan Allen is 17.0% less likely to be in those winning lineups as well. Yep. So yeah, for me, it would be something that I'm likely negatively boosting or docking, I guess would be the right term. I would dock Keenan Allen in lineups that have Austin Eckler at captain and vice versa.
Yep. Cool. I agree with that for sure. Eddie says Gerald Everett captain and Prince. So fade us. And I listen, after last Thursday, would not blame you at all for fading us. I mean, there's a chance Cody and I are starting Gerald Everett in FFPC main event team if Josh Palmer's out tonight. So there you go. All right, I think that covered. Oh, do you have any takes on Keenan? Like, I know I kind of painted a real bear case. Like, I still think obviously there's a massive floor ceiling combo there. I think we should all, considering what we've seen so far this year, those super ceiling games, like, don't expect those, especially against a tough Chargers defense. I know they don't have Trayvon Diggs anymore, but this is still a good overall secondary. They're, I think, second overall in fantasy points allowed to opposing receivers. Like, this is not the best spot in the world.
Yeah, I think I mostly agree with you. Just to paint kind of the bull case for Keenan Allen, which I don't think anyone really needs me to do at this point, but this is still, an awesome role. And I know part of this is kind of because Keenan Allen, Austin Eckler has been out of the lineup. I'm going to get those guys confused the entire show. But because Austin Eckler has been out of the lineup, he does lead the team in target share, 31%, air yard share at 32.9%, first read target share, red zone target share, really any receiving metric you want to look at. And specifically with Mike Williams out, I know QJ is coming along. I know Joshua Palmer is pretty talented wide receiver too, I suppose. But this is still Keenan Allen's team from a wide receiver perspective, from a target perspective. I will say, to agree with your point, Gary, since 2020, in 10 games where Austin Eckler has not played, Keenan Allen has averaged 22.7 DraftKings points versus 16.2 DraftKings points in the 34 games that he has played. So definitely something to just not seeing that nuclear upside when Eckler's in the lineup. They're kind of competing for similar short area targets in those games. And because of that, yeah, they're really going to kind of eat into each other's upside a little bit. And then you don't have Keenan getting the rushing volume that Eckler is getting. So I think I agree with you. I think the $600 price tag is actually going to keep Austin Eckler a little bit more. $600 increase in price is going to keep Eckler's ownership in check a little bit more. And so, yeah, if I had to grade him one straight up, I think I would prefer Eckler over Keenan.
And I know Keenan's a quick target guy too, but the reason that his ceiling gets so much higher on Eckler games is because he takes that extension of the run game that Austin Eckler often is himself, right? Austin Eckler is the run game and the extension of the run game. And if Dallas is successfully going to get pressure, I think we could see an 8-catch Eckler game easily, where I think Keenan's catches go down a little bit, and Keenan's young run after catch stuff in that midfield stuff is really elevated when Eckler's off the field. So I just, again, I'm just looking for edges here. It's one that, hey, maybe we have a little bit of. I'm not saying that a 10 for 120 and 2 touchdown game is not in the range of outcomes for Keenan Allen. 100% is. But we have studs galore. 4 guys that are fantasy superstars between Keenan, CD, Pollard, and Eckler. So it's just, you're looking for places to maybe come in under the field, and
you have to get comfortable with some pretty uncomfortable fades. You're going to come in underweight on, if not, just one, probably multiple of some of these studs. You're not going to be able to get overweight on Keenan and Eckler and Lamb and Pollard. Like, there's going to have to be some decisions made in your lineup, specifically if you want the quarterbacks too, to some degree. So yeah, you're going to have some pretty uncomfortable fades, and that's the nature of the game. We love these slates because we expect some offensive fireworks, but we also kind of hate them because you come in underweight Keenan Allen, suddenly he's got 35 DraftKings points, and you kind of hate yourself for it. But yeah, get comfortable being uncomfortable on this slate, because you're not going to be able to get overweight on all these guys.
Right. And Keenan's also the best direct pivot spot in this slate, because it's not just Eckler that, negatively correlate with each other, but you could not play Keenan and then get in on a 25% total on Josh Palmer, or 21% total on Quentin Johnson, and feel better about their ceiling cases in non-Keenan Allen lineups. So, all right, that's my Keenan Allen shake. Let's talk Dallas pass catchers here. Seems like a lot of love for CD in the chat. I know you're into CD tonight. Take it away on one, CD Lamb here.
Yeah, CD's 9K, and a lot of that's because of the box score production. He's had 11.7. He had the big 28.3 DraftKings point game, then back to 10.2, 14.8, 8.9. Certainly not what you would expect from kind of a back end of the first, second round offseason target in terms of season-long best ball leagues. And it's been a pretty rough stretch for CD Lamb. Like Tony Pollard, I'm pretty willing to just chalk it up to negative game script from both sides of the aisle there. I think that we get a back and forth affair tonight, and I'm pretty inclined to believe that he still has that monster upside that we've seen from him in the past. Even like the underlying metrics don't look great for him, but like he's come out of games in garbage time, which he did last week. And then the team just isn't dropping back a ton when they've been up big, like they have been against the Giants and the Jets and teams like that. So you have a guy that's got a 21.7% target share, 26.3% air yard share, leads the team in end zone targets with 4. But in neutral script, Lamb owns a 27.8% target share, 47.0% air yard share. And those numbers are kind of much more in line with what we would expect from an alpha wide receiver 1. Now he gets a matchup against a Chargers defense that's allowing the league's third most DraftKings points to opposing wide receivers. Yeah, I mean, it's all signs pointing up for CeeDee Lamb. Price tag looks nice. Matchup is favorable. Offensive environment should be good. The underlying usage metrics, if you throw out some of the garbage time stuff, look phenomenal. I think it's hard to paint a bear case for CeeDee Lamb at 9K.
I agree. And I don't love that we agree so much, but it's like, which squeaky wheel narrative do you like more, CD or Pollard? And I think both guys have a really strong one tonight, but I love CD in this matchup. Potential shootout. The Chargers have not had any success really shutting down opposing receivers or quarterbacks for that matter. And I could see a huge CD game, and I feel like he's done it a lot on primetime too. I know I talked about this with Kelsey a couple weeks ago, and we hit that one, right? And I was like, it just seems to get it done on these primetime spots. I don't have obviously those numbers in front of me, but 50% total ownership, 10% captain ownership at a 9K CD Lamb seems totally fine. Like, no issues playing into that type of ownership for that price and that player. So not much to add on CD. Seems like an excellent play. It gets much more interesting when you kind of go down the depth chart here to Brandon Cooks and Michael Gallup. Gallup just seems underpriced compared to, and go read Cody's article because he really breaks down kind of the difference in role between Cooks and Gallup, and it isn't that much. So I'll throw it to you for that one. Cooks definitely was the guy coming into the season. We felt very comfortable. They go out and get him. Going to be that pure wide receiver 2 role. But we haven't quite seen it in production yet. Again, really hard to play into this 5-game sample size too much because of how weird the Cowboys games have been. But, have not seen it yet out of Brandon Cooks, who at this point in his career, it's reasonable to think maybe we're on the wrong side of 30 here.
Yeah, I think that's the problem here. And look, neither of these guys have looked good on a per snap or per route basis, but you kind of have to take price into consideration. You have to kind of, again, hate to keep saying this, but throw out the first 5 weeks of weird game scripts. You got to kind of throw that out the window. Cooks does still lead this duo in target share, 15.3% to 13.7%, and air yard share, 25.8% to 22.4%. But they're pretty close in terms of just overall opportunities in this Cowboys offense. And then you look at the price discrepancy. Brandon Cooks is 5,400. Michael Gallup is 2,800. And they're separated by 1.4 DraftKings points in base projection, 2.1 DraftKings points in ceiling. And you've heard us talk about CeeDee Lamb. You've heard us talk about Tony Pollard. We like both quarterbacks. We like Keenan Allen. We like all these expensive guys, right? We like Austin Eckler. What's one way you can play those guys without sacrificing too much projection while still getting somebody with some upside in your captain spot? You can go to a cheap Michael Gallup at 2,800. And I think that's viable on a slate like this, where you do want to try and jam in as many of those guys as possible. I don't generally like to go there because you still do need a ceiling out of your captain. It's not just enough to get kind of that point per dollar upside from him. So if Gallup goes out there and pays off his price tag by scoring, 2 or 3x his salary, that might still not be enough. You need somebody that does have 15 at least, but likely 20-point type upside to at least compete with the guys like Keenan, like Lamb, like Eckler on this slate. I think Gallup can do that. And I think it's just a misprice. I think he should probably be like 4,600, 4,800 on this slate, and it would then be a much worse play. But I think because he's 2,800, he kind of unlocks a lot if you do feel comfortable enough to play him at captain. And that's one of those ways you can get a bunch of studs in the flex by playing somebody as cheap as him. The one thing I would caution against, though, if you want to go that route to try and jam in as many studs as possible, his captain ownership might stay low because not a ton of people are going to feel comfortable playing him. But all of those captain lineups that have Michael Gallup in there are going to look relatively similar, because what you do is you play Gallup at 2,800 and then you jam in the studs. All of a sudden, that 3.5% of Gallup lineups looks really similar to one another. So if you're doing something like that, I would just caution against, you need to kind of pull some other levers in order to be unique, whether that's A, leaving a little bit more salary on the table than you normally feel comfortable with, or B, doing something that's kind of uncorrelated in the flex, like playing, players that might not correlate well enough together that the field would play together. You just kind of have to play around with that a little bit. But I think he's a viable flex option where he's probably $2K underpriced.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Still not sure what level of NFL player he is these days. I know people were concerned about his profile, but another year separated from the ACL, and he's out there running routes. Like 2,800 is just too cheap. I think Cooks is also a squeaky wheel guy. Like I mentioned the wrong side of 30. I looked it up. He had turned 30 3 weeks ago. So, I mean, it seems like he's been around forever.
Yeah.
And obviously last year was kind of a lost year for him, kind of quitting on the Texans there or whatever happened. But I still think there's an upside here. I want to be really into CD tonight. So I think that comes a little bit at the expense of a Cook ceiling. But you never know. So I don't hate any of these guys. Would you be, I guess unless it's an onslaught, would you be a max 2 of these 3?
I think because of the price tags on these guys, I'm going to be a little bit more loose with the rules. Normally it'd be kind of like, so if I had CD at captain, it would be max 1 of Cooks, Ferguson, Gallup, Turpin, Schoonmaker. Like I would be pretty strict in that respect. But I think because of the cheap price tag on Gallup, you could get a CD plus Ferguson and Gallup in the flex. And if I'm playing more than 2 of them, I definitely want Dak in the lineup. Regardless of how things look, if I've got, whether they're at flex or captain, if I've got a flex CeeDee Lamb, Jake Ferguson, and Michael Gallup, I want Dak in that lineup somewhere. It doesn't need to be a flex. It could be, or it doesn't need to be a captain. It could be a flex as well. But I have a tough time seeing 3 pass catchers providing a slate winning score without Dak also being in the winning lineup.
Yes, I would agree with that. Absolutely. On tight end side here, Jake Ferguson's an interesting tag at 52, kind of right in that mid-tier range, like, between Brandon Cooks and Quentin Johnston. Roll's been really good. It's very clearly the tight end 1 in this mix. Haven't necessarily seen the ceiling outcome there, but the floor has been okay. And all it takes is one tight ends on Showdown slate for Jake Ferguson here, and it seems like it could be tonight. So overall, don't have any issues with the rejection, ownership. 29, a little hot, but again, you're going to probably fit in those mid-tier guys pretty, consistently tonight because of the salary savings. So any thoughts on Ferguson or Schoonmaker there as your true $200?
Yeah, I think Ferguson's kind of been really close to some big games. And since it might seem like a small deal, but since Peyton Hendershot went down with injury, his route participation has increased to 67% in week 4, 73% in week 5. He's got a 25.0% targets per route run rate this season. He's the guy, just like Dalton Schultz was before him, that's getting targeted a bunch in the red zone. 32.3% target share or in the red zone leads the team. And he's actually doing something after the catch, 0.22 fewer yards after the catch than CeeDee Lamb on average. So I know I called Gerald Everett a kind of a catch and fall down tight end. I don't feel the same way about Jake Ferguson. I feel like he can actually provide some upside. If he is getting some of those short dump offs, I think he could, actually do something with those. He does get a good matchup against the Chargers that's coughing up the league's 6th highest target share to inline receivers, where you're going to see Ferguson run a bunch of his routes. So yeah, I do think Ferguson has, multi-catch upside. You could see 4 to 5 catches from him. Could get to the 50, 60 yard range and fall into the end zone. And at his price tag, I think that is plenty to get it done. So I do like Ferguson at 5,200. I certainly prefer him to Cooks if they're going to come in anywhere close in terms of projected ownership.
Yeah, and then Schoonmaker as like the one guy that 200 that true tight end 2. We've seen these guys hit plenty of times before. If you're fully trying to squeeze as many studs as possible, I guess he'd be your favorite absolute punt tonight, right? I was looking at that and at these $200 guys. I don't see anyone else.
Yep, I think he would be the guy. Again, you're looking at MME only. I don't even know if I'd get there in a 20 max, but in a 150 set, he should certainly be a part of your pool. And if you got 5 to 10%, I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
Yeah. Yep. Agreed there. Kevontae Turpin, we saw score a touchdown. Was it last week or 2 weeks ago in the receiving game? We talked about this in preseason. They were like trying so hard to see what they have out of him and as a receiver, and now seems to be running as a receiver 4. Obviously brings you a little bit of upside as the return man as well. Another guy that makes your pool, I presume.
He does make the pool. He's just been, obviously ran super, super hot to get the touchdown, but they're trying to scheme up opportunities to him. And you can see that in kind of his targets per route run rate. He's not out there for a ton of routes, but when he's out there, he's getting some designed looks. And it makes sense. He's a super fast guy, and not just fast for like the USFL or fast for the preseason. He's fast. And as an added element to their offense, I think they want to try and get him involved. I would expect a schemed touch or 2, but he's not the stone minimum at 1,600. I think he really needs to do something for you. And you have the problem with Gallup just being priced, not too far above him, where Gallup's going to get 5, 6, 7 targets, somewhere in that range, 4, 5, 6, 7 targets. And Turpin might be, live for only 1. So yeah, makes the MME player pool, but I'm not super excited about it.
Fair enough. All right, DSTs and kickers. I feel like every time we see Dallas's defense on a Showdown slate, they are both viable or optimal and very heavily owned. Doesn't seem like that tonight with this 51-point total. Both these teams, 15%-ish total ownership. How are you feeling about the defenses here?
Yeah, I'm into the defenses here a little bit. And honestly, if this holds at 2.1% and 1.9% captain ownership, and we might have to scrub this from the internet so I don't get canceled.
Whoa.
Yeah. I'm going to say it. I'm going to say it.
I think at 3,800
and 2.1% projected ownership at captain, the Cowboys DST at captain is viable, as is the Chargers DST at 3,200 and 1.9%.
All right. If it goes south, canceled.
If it goes south, I will scrub this from the internet. I'll make sure the media team never puts this out for anyone's consumption. But I think it's live, and part of the reason why it's live is the same reason we talked about with Michael Gallup. You want to play Keenan Allen. You want to play Austin Eckler. You want to play CeeDee Lamb. You want to play Tony Pollard. You want to try and fit all of these guys into a lineup. And I think they've left the Cowboys and the Chargers defense too cheap. And I think because of the 51-point total, because of how many offensive players the field wants to jam into lineups, I think both of these defenses are going to go under-owned at flex and at captain. And I think they're kind of the ones that can also compete with the ceiling to give you just enough to kind of get the rest of the pieces that you need in the flex to make a winning type roster tonight. And I really don't think it's going to be owned. Now, again, reserve the right to scrub this if they come in at 5% owned or 7% owned or whatever. But if it holds at 2 and they're as cheap as they are, I think it's an okay play.
Wowie, wowie, wowie. Cody already had 7 Busch Lights for his birthday earlier today, guys, so take that for what you will. Hoffa said Cody birthday shots early. Who are we talking to here? We don't certainly not our Showdown King recommending a defense at captain.
So let me just say I'm a slave to the math, right? I'm a slave to the numbers. We have 1.9% projected ownership for the Chargers DST at captain. They're appearing in our optimals at a 3.2% clip at captain. That's the Chargers. The Cowboys, we have at 2.1% projected captain ownership. They're appearing at a 4.5% clip. I think that's the first time I've seen them show as quote unquote positive leverage in that spot on the season. And again, I think it's just largely a result of the slate dynamics where playing these defenses that have enough of a ceiling to get you close will allow you to fit all the studs that you want to play.
All right. You've heard it there. Kickers. I think kickers also make some sense here. I probably like them in lineups where I'm fading quarterbacks more tonight. Again, those in the flex, I'm sure that can be true for any slate, but for some reason it feels even more true here if you're not converting touchdowns in a 51-point, fast-paced game, then these kickers are going to be heard from. Any preference or any thoughts on kickers here?
Yeah, I like the kickers, and I think kickers make more sense as flex options on tonight's slate. The problem is where the defenses are kind of priced down. You have these kickers who are priced up. Brandon Aubrey's 5K. I think that's the first time we've seen a 5K kicker all season. Cameron Dicker's 4,400. I think they both make sense. I think they're still slightly overowned at flex relative to how frequently they find optimal lineups. You have all those receivers that we just talked about with Quentin Johnson, who's cheaper, with Brandon Cooks, who's about the same price, with Jake Ferguson, who's cheaper or about the same price. And then, of course, you have Michael Gallup, who's 2,800. So I think they're just a little bit overpriced, but certainly makes sense as kind of safe pieces of cash game roster construction if you feel the need to go there.
Very nice. Dick of the kicker on the slate, as we say. Unfortunately, I don't think we really have time for questions here. We're at 45 minutes. Cody's birthday. I have to run. But of course, if you're behind the paywall, establish the run, Cody. I think even on your birthday, Cody, right? You're not doing anything else. You'll be in there answering questions for the people.
That's right. I will be in there answering questions up till kickoff as I try to decide if I'm actually going to play a captain DST or not.
There you go. Of course, Cody, you get the honors on your birthday. Flag plan away. Again, as I said, we can only go up from Jerry Jeudy and Russell Wilson.
I'm not going to flag plant the captain DST. I saw someone appreciate you Chase flag planted Cody no balls. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. I will leave my balls out of this, but I am going to go to a Cowboys pass catcher, which is maybe equally as risky. It's not going to be CeeDee Lamb. It's not going to be the very obvious $2,800 punt option in Michael Gallup. I'm going to the mid tier with a tight end on Showdown. Jake Ferguson, the role continues to increase. 46% route participation in week 2, 62% in week 3, 67% in week 4, culminating with a 73% in week 5. He is a guy that has impressed on a per route basis with a 25.0% targets per route run rate, and a guy that's going to get targeted in the red zone. 32.3% red zone target share, does lead the team. I think this is a good matchup for him. I like CeeDee Lamb. I think the Chargers will try to do the best that they can to limit CeeDee Lamb. And if that's the case, this is a Chargers defense that is already coughing up the 6th highest target share to inline receivers this season. I think this is a great spot for Jake Ferguson at 5,200 to find his way into the optimal lineup.
First time you surprised me this year. I feel like I've been reading you like a book throughout the show. I for sure thought you were going CeeDee Lamb. You leave me open to CeeDee Lamb, but Cody, I think we have to switch it up. We've been taken from the same team, every single slate. Technically, they eat into each other's ceilings a little bit. I do like CeeDee Lamb. I was going to go there if you went a Charger, but I'm going to go a Charger. My part of my brain wants me to go Josh Palmer here. I'm a little 7K and a Saturday injury designation just scares me just a little bit. I like him at his ownership. I like it a lot. I'm going to go to the rookie. I know it's the hot pick. I'm going to go Quentin Johnston, 4,200, just right in that range. Where he's not going to get too steamed up because he's not like your 2,600 Donald Parham. I think 28-30% seems okay there. We saw it ticking in the right direction as far as his route participation, his time on the field before the bye. You mentioned in your article, you feel like post post bye rookie breakout candidate, certainly in the mix here. I like going, I mentioned I don't mind the Herbert captain lineup, so I feel like he's a guy that makes sense in those, but even not Eckler captain lineups with Herbert double with, Quentin Johnson, those types of things. I like it no matter how you shake it out there. So, give me those non-Keenan Allen Chargers pass catchers tonight, and I'll throw my flag on Quentin Johnston here tonight. All right.
I love it.
That'll do it. Cody Main, my good friend, happy birthday. Enjoy the day. I hope you have plenty of success in DFS tonight. And at the very least, I hope the football gods give you a good game in which you do not have to tweet out your famed expectations picture. Love doing the show with you. As always, we'll be back on Thursday. What do we got on Thursday, Cody? First time I take a look at week 7. Let's see. We have Jacksonville Saints. All right. Hey, okay. Not terrible. We could do worse. All right. So we'll be back for Jags Saints on Thursday. Happy birthday to Cody Main. Good luck to all of you out there. Thank you for tuning in. We will see you then.